Pray. O Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable unto you, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So welcome this week to the start of our season of women here at St. George. And I know we have been stopping to notice the great women when they appear in the lectionary all year. But now, this fall, we really get to dedicate ourselves to this task because the lectionary includes the stories of so many great women from the Old Testament in our readings over the next 2 months. So we are really going to get to dig in and experience these stories together. And we are going to get to revisit a bunch of what I would consider our Sunday school greats. Eve and Esther, Deborah, Mary and Martha, characters you are probably all pretty familiar with, especially those who did a turn teaching Sunday school at some point in their faith journeys. And I really wish we could have kicked off our series with one of these ladies, with a much easier story to talk about. But alas, we begin our journey this week someplace else, in the New Testament, with the story of Jesus and the Syrophoenician woman. And trust me, this was not my first choice, because this story is weird. Jesus' behavior is really out of character. How can this man, who has always been known for his outreach to outsiders, to the poor, to women, to anyone else that society deemed as outside, be so rude to this woman? And trust me, it is exactly as rude as it sounds. Jesus helps other women. Jesus helps other Gentiles. He has the longest recorded conversation in the whole Bible with a different Gentile woman at the well in Samaria. Now that's the kind of story I want to talk about. Yet here today, Jesus is just kind of a little bit of a jerk. But here's the thing. There's an important difference between these other folks we just talked about and the woman that we encounter today. She is a Syrophoenician. This woman is rich. She is privileged. She is special. And chances are Jesus and his disciples just really don't like her. Mark makes a special point of telling us that she is not just a Gentile, that's a different word for that, but a Hellene, a Greek-speaking elite, and of special Syrophoenician origin. For Greek-speaking Syrophoenicians were a special Roman merchant class that ran the Mediterranean port cities of Tyre, Sidon, and Ptolemais. They collected exorbitantly high rents and egregious taxes of grain on the native Jewish, Samaritan, and Armenian residents of the area. And they used these proceeds to run an incredibly profitable export business. Ships set sail from Tyre almost every day to far-flung parts of the empire filled with grain, while the people of the Galilee were left to starve. There were real reasons to be suspicious of her. So what a remarkable reversal it must have seemed to be to Jesus and his disciples to watch Jesus tell this woman that he is not going to take food off of their tables to give to her, the one who has literally been stealing food off of Galilean tables. But what is even more remarkable in this story is her response. We might have expected someone like her to fall back on position in a time like this. We might expect her to answer rudeness with rudeness, to offer money or to threaten Jesus with censure or arrest for failing to meet her demands. But she does none of these things. She answers him with total humility. Instead of falling back on her supposedly superior wealth and position, she sets it aside and leans into their shared humanity and God's abundant grace. Yet this is what makes this story so special. Here we witness this truly magical moment where this act of humility and trust changes the very mind of God. Often, scholars like to talk about this story like it was a setup by Jesus. Like he knew he was going to help her all along. Jesus is perfect. He is without sin. So he can't possibly have made a mistake, right? Therefore, he must have known all along what he was going to do. Maybe it was a test for this woman or a teaching moment for his disciples. But maybe the lesson here is different. Perhaps this story has something else to tell us, something far more important. That it is not a sin to be wrong. It is not a sin to learn something new and to change your mind. It is not a sin to listen to others, to overcome prejudice, even if it's deserved, to learn and to grow, and to share compassion for someone, and to let that encounter change your beliefs. In fact, doing so is in the very nature of God. Because the story is not quite as odd as we might think. The healing of the Syrophoenician's daughter stands in a long tradition of examples of times when people convince God to act in favor of mercy. For God's mercy often triumphs God's justice. Remember Moses arguing with God over the destruction of Sodom, or when God spares Nineveh after Jonah's preaching, or how the prophets successfully intercede between God and the people of Israel over and over again to stave off destruction. Often, we are too quick to judge people who change their minds. In politics, we call them flip-floppers, or we think of them as people with poor convictions or weak beliefs. But that is not really true at all. It takes great strength to be willing to learn, to change, and to grow. To be willing to show compassion for others and to form new relationships across difficult boundaries. To let our experiences in the world shape and change us. And it almost always takes far more work to really change than to stay the same. But that is exactly what Jesus does in this passage, and exactly what God calls us to do as well. And it all starts because this woman is willing to take that first step, to make the connection across a difficult divide. When Jesus initially insults her and dismisses her needs, the logical choice would have been for her to fight back, to use her power and privilege to try to win the argument or prove him wrong, to make it an all-or-nothing proposition. And likely, she would have failed, and her daughter would have suffered for it. But instead, she does something astonishing. Instead of pulling back, she moves closer. She uses connection. She forms a relationship. She understands that she doesn't need to win. She doesn't need everything. That even the crumbs of God's love are sufficient for the salvation of the world. And this action, This act of humility and love, this moment of connection is so powerful that it literally changes the world because it changes Jesus. It changes the very mind of God. And so not only does she get her desired healing for her daughter, but it starts off this chain reaction that changes the course of Jesus' ministry. Because the two stories that we heard today and the one that follows them are paired together for a reason. And the second story that we heard is a demonstration of the change that happens in Jesus. After the encounter with this woman, Jesus leaves and he heads back toward the Sea of Galilee. But he doesn't go the most direct or safest route. Instead, he goes all the way around the longer Gentile way and stops in the Decapolis, a Greek colonial territory, rather than returning straight to the Jewish Galilee. And here, he heals a deaf, mute man. And I don't think that it's a coincidence that the first recorded thing he does after meeting this woman is to take radical action to restore the ability of Jesus and this Gentile to hear and speak to each other, to form a meaningful and understanding mutual relationship that was impossible before, to connect across a major divide. And then, despite being told to keep it a secret, this man and those with him go and they speak to everyone. And then a crowd comes. And in the next bit that we didn't hear in our lesson, Jesus sees this crowd and has compassion on them. And so he repeats the miracle of feeding the 5,000 that he had just performed in Jewish territory by feeding 4,000 Gentiles with 7 loaves of bread and 7 fish. How is that for crumbs off the master's table? 4,000 people eat their fill with much left over from the crumbs that this woman requested, all because she led with humility and connection, not power and control. So to start our theme of lead like a woman, what can we learn from this particular biblical woman? What would it mean to follow her example in our daily lives? To lean away from power and control and towards compassion and connection. To resist the urge to hit back or to meet rudeness with rudeness, or to the urge to debate our neighbor in order to try to score that win. To resist the urge to repost and share that particularly cutting meme, and instead to try for connection, compromise, and love. To get curious about others, and to try to understand where they are coming from, to ask questions, and to extend love and compassion, and to remember that love ripples. Jesus is never very nice to the Syrophoenician woman. She leaves without even knowing for sure about the outcome for herself, much less others. But 4,000 people on the other side of the country get fed because she made the effort. If this simple action has the power to change God's mind, imagine what it could do for the person sitting next to you. Amen.